Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 355. Today's podcast is brought to you by hititboard.com and the new Teeter Teach It, an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hititboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today, we're going to be talking about one piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment is the dog walk. And for those of you who are on social media, I think it's pretty safe to say that if you're on social media, you probably have seen something this week about the dog walk. There's been a lot of discussion going on, and a lot of that has happened because of a new video that was put out by Clip and Go Agility, which is an equipment manufacturer here in the United States, where they actually created a prototype dog walk and ran some tests on it. So we actually have invited to the podcast today the owner of Clip and Go Agility, Mark Bills. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Glad to be here today. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I wanted to start off by kind of taking a step back from the discussion of the dog walk and recognize that this is actually not a new conversation, that over the years, plenty of people have brought up the idea of changes to the dog walk. So what would it look like? What would it look like in agility if the dog walk were lower than it currently is? What would it look like if it was wider than it currently is? And I think these ideas have kind of come and gone, and they go hand in hand a lot of times with safety concerns. But that's not the only reason that people talk about making changes to equipment.
Yeah, I think as far as the dog walk, the thing that's different now, of course, is that someone's gone and made a different dog walk and then run some dogs on it and then shown a little bit of a comparison between that dog walk and the one that everyone uses right now. So I think it's kind of taken it to the next level and it's gone viral. Exactly.
So, Mark, you were the one that kind of put that together. But I did want to point out that a couple of months ago, Katerina, who is a very well-regarded and well-known dog agility competitor and coach, she does a lot of work with running contact. She has running contact classes. And I apologize that I don't know how to say her last name, so I'm just going to call her Katerina, but I will put a link to her Facebook profile in the show notes. But she actually commissioned a wider dog walk for herself so that she could take a look at what effect that might have with her own dogs and kind of, again, bring to reality some of the theories and thoughts that people have been voicing over the years about this piece of equipment. Hers was made by Gallican. So that's kind of the history. We have Katerina. She used a 40 centimeter dog walk. So normally they're 30 centimeters. And for us in the US, it's normally 12 inches wide. And hers was almost 16 inches wide. And what Mark has done was created a dog walk that was 18 inches wide, right?
Yes.
So basically 50% wider. And so, of course, once it really started to hit social media, then there were a lot of opinions from a lot of people. And we wanted to take this podcast to kind of talk through the reasons why we might want to change the dog walk, the reasons why we might not want to change the dog walk, how feasible is it, what would the cost be, to kind of talk through these issues from our perspective, and also kind of taking a view at kind of a consolidated view of what has been brought up in comments in social media, but also we emailed our mailing list and basically presented the question to them. And I think that that's worth noting because sometimes you get loud voices on social media But there are a group of people that don't feel comfortable with that kind of the public nature of that forum. So you don't always get kind of the full breadth of what people think because they don't want to get roasted on social media. So by sending an email out to our list, we could also kind of get a little bit more of a private view into what people are thinking, including kind of some dissenting opinions from what you're seeing on Facebook. And I think that it's important to kind of bring all of that together.
That's right. So we raised the question in the Wednesday wrap-up. So that's our newsletter that goes out every Wednesday. It's mostly written by me. Sometimes Jen, Sarah, other people will contribute to it. But we put Mark's video in there, so everyone had the opportunity to look at that and also see what UKI had posted. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly, about their position on the discussion. And Katarina's as well, and ask them what they thought about the dog walk. Free response. So they could just hit reply to the email and get back in touch with me. Within the first 24 hours, we had over 50 responses. And so I broke it into 3 categories. Pro changing the dog walk, people who want to see a change, any kind of change, some kind of change. Pro keeping things the same, absolute status quo, no change at all. And pro, keep things the same for now, but let's explore this further. Okay, so I think that's an important distinction to make. So kind of these 3 groups. People who wanted to keep it the same, just about 10%. 10%. People who definitely think it should be changed in some way was 62%. And the remaining 27% went to, or I guess I would say 28% with rounding. Keep things the same for now, but we need to take a closer look at this. We need more information. We need more data. So, of course, this is a very small and sampled bias of respondents. I think in general, anytime you're talking about changing something for safety issues, you're going to have a disproportional response to people who are affected by that issue. So basically, people who have had dogs that have been negatively impacted by the dog walk in some way, right? That fell off or were injured. Don't like the dog walk, don't perform the dog walk well, things like that. It's kind of their opportunity to speak up and get changes made. So I think we always kind of need to keep that bias in the back of our heads, right? The people who are perfectly content with the dog walk may be less inclined to speak up, especially if on social media, where your responses are very public, there's discomfort with kind of outing yourself as like, I think maybe the dog walk's okay. And that's why I'm sharing these responses here, even though the sample size is kind of small, because we've asked questions before in the past where we get very different answers than what is running around on social media when people are comfortable with and have some kind of anonymity, right? But in this case, I would say, well, I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves, right? So go ahead, Jen.
Well, I just will kind of put myself in this category. I have said nothing on social media. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I don't want people to know my views. That's why I'm here. I'm here on this podcast today because I'm willing to talk about it. But I just feel like on social media, like behind a computer screen, it's hard to read context and it's hard to read tone and it's hard to kind of get a feel where with this format, where you guys can hear me, you can hear how I'm talking, we can have a conversation about it. You know, some of the things that I don't necessarily have opinions on, but I'm thinking, you know, what about? Has anybody thought about this? Should we consider this? Mm-hmm. If you say something about, you know, well, what about the tunnels under the dog walk? It could sound, well, what about the tunnels under the dog walk? Or it can sound like, oh, what about those tunnels? Like, it's hard to know context. So I think there is a huge population of people who are afraid to go online, who might be more willing to write privately. And again, I'm just saying in this case, I'm willing to have a conversation with anybody about it. I'm just hesitant to put things in writing where you can't understand tone and you can't present it as an exploratory comment without it sounding wrong to the wrong person and then hating you forever.
Right, exactly.
So that's kind of what I'm here for. Like I would consider myself very neutral on things. We'll talk about it as we get in, but I'm willing to talk about it. But I want to talk. I want to be open to the conversation, to understand tone, to understand perspectives, and not just make a sentence that without correct punctuation and tone, it's hard to interpret.
Right, exactly. And one thing that I did want to bring up right at this very beginning part of the podcast. And it is a comment that, has been made both privately and in social media, is that there is a potential conflict of interest when you are talking to somebody who makes equipment about, do we need to change our current equipment, right? Because that is, somebody's going to have to make all of the new dog walks if there were going to be a change. So I want to acknowledge it, but I also think that it's, I wanted to talk to Mark.
You're talking about Mark.
Right. I'm talking about Mark. But
Mark, I hear you make dog agility equipment.
Right. So Mark makes dog agility equipment, but I also think that, that having Mark on, first of all, I have full faith that the four of us can have like an intelligent conversation about the issue. And I also, like I said in the beginning, like, it's not that equipment manufacturers came out of nowhere and said, hey guys, why don't we change our equipment, right? This conversation has been happening on the internet. People have been talking about it at various times for years, and it's the equipment manufacturers are the ones in a position to turn the theoretical into something that we can actually look at. So given that we do have Mark here, let's kind of kick things off by, Mark, why don't you tell us what exactly you did in terms of the experiment that you ran, the dogs that you ran it on, and kind of how that came apart, and kind of,
especially for anyone who hasn't seen the video yet. We'll put a link to the video so people can see it, but people who are listening might not have had the chance, or if they're not on Facebook, might not have seen the video.
Well, guys, leading up to this, obviously I produced this video and put it out, but I want people to understand this isn't the first test I've ever run on dog agility equipment. If you were to look at the history, I've tested what the impact is on a dog when they hit a jump, or how hard do they hit the up of the A-frame, or what's the difference between jumping 24 inches and 20 inches. We've run a number of tests. I'm kind of fascinated to try to figure out what is the best thing for our dogs. And so I've done a lot of that over the years. I kind of call myself the Mythbusters of dog agility. It's not true scientific studies, but we try to get an idea of what's the best way to build things and what can we do for the sport. And then typically in the past, that's always been working within the constructs of the rules and regulations. That's really where it comes down to. How can I make the best seesaw for a dog that complies with the regulations? And we've put a lot of work into that. What happened in this case was back in the fall, there was a big social media blow up about the dog walk. And I started getting contacted privately. Mark, you build equipment. What do you think? And I was getting multiple requests to voice my opinion. And I put a couple comments on some Facebook posts, but I really had no better answers than anybody else. So that started sticking with me. And I said, well, if I have this testing background, I have the resources to build a piece of equipment to test on, and I just start spinning and thinking about all those options and came to the decision that it would be worthwhile to build this dog walk. And then once we made that decision, it was just working with my friends, my coaches, other exhibitors, talking about how we want to do that. In other words, how big does the new dog walk want to be? How high does it want to be? And just trying to work through those issues and think through them, because I had one pass at this. It wasn't like I was going to make a 14-inch dog walk, a 16-inch dog walk, an 18-inch dog walk, and so on. So we took our best swing at it, landing on 18 inches. And then we produced the video, but as I was shooting the videos and as we were doing this, all those test subjects were basically students in my training center, and they were there practicing or whatever. And I'd say, hey, can you come over here for just a second? You want to be a test subject? And then they would run and I would film it. But it became evident really quick that there was a dramatic change. The handlers, these are people, they're just a lot of them are your typical AKC weekend person, but they know their dogs really well. They train them, they know them well, and they would sit there and they'd run their dog across that wider dog walk that was lower, and they'd look back at me and go, oh my, did you see that? He moves so much better. And we kept getting this recurring theme. even before I started studying the videos. So it was early on, we thought, man, this could be beneficial. So that's when I decided harder to work at the video and I actually put something out there and publish it. We did send it to all of the major organizations before I published it. So AKC and UKI and USDAA have all had early copies of it. I didn't want to surprise anybody with anything. And so it really took off. I didn't expect it to be this big. I mean, I looked this afternoon, I think that video's had 250,000 views in 4 days.
Wow.
So it has really caught on. I've struck at something that the agility community has some passion about. That's for certain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I want to get into next really like, what are the issues? What are the pros and the cons of changing a dog walk? And here I want to pull from something that I saw on Facebook. Anne Brow posted, but she credited one of her students for kind of framing it this way. And she basically said, in order to even have a discussion, it would be nice to have an idea of what is the point of the dog walk. What are we trying to test that isn't tested, in the rest of the agility course, right? And so, I think that is something that is worth keeping in mind as we talk about these things. I will say, though, that I think flashiness and fun and spectator appeal are absolutely valid reasons, in my opinion. Here's where we may start to get some dissenting opinions. Yeah. I don't know, but in my opinion, the entire sport is a game, and we always talk about, because we as agility competitors think of agility as the best thing that you can do with your dog, right? Mm-hmm. We tell people, we tell outsiders when they ask what we do, that this is the most fun thing you can watch in dog sports, right? That's our opinion, that this is the most fun thing you can watch. And the reason is because that there are a lot of cool things that we ask our dogs to do. So
right.
I think that is.
And there's variety too.
Variety.
Once
right.
you've seen one flyball competition, some spectators are going to find that a little bit repetitive. You go to a couple dog diving competitions and okay, this dog is jumping 3 inches longer than the previous one. But in agility, the courses are always different. There's different equipment. And so I think there's a little bit more variety when you're talking about the whole of dog sports options for spectators. Okay, I'm not disrespecting any particular dog sport. Okay, I'm just saying from the spectator perspective.
Right. And so I think another interesting thought that I've been having over the past couple of days is also kind of the burden of proof. Right? Do we come at this from the perspective of why should we change the dog walk? Or do you come from the perspective of why shouldn't we change the dog walk, right? Who has the burden of proof, keeping it the same or changing it? And I think that a lot of the comments, it really is about why you feel the way you do, right? Are you looking at it from a safety perspective? Are you looking at it from a ease of training perspective? Are you, all of these different reasons that you're coming at it? But I think we can kind of dive in and talk about some of the major ones, because especially if we start from the perspective of Mark's video, right? There were 2 big changes that he made. He lowered the height from 4 feet to 3 feet. Mm-hmm. And widened the dog walk. And those are 2 significant changes. And in my opinion, they kind of help 2 different populations of dogs, right? Mm-hmm. So, when we think about, and I've seen it in the emails that I've gotten. So when we think about lowering the jump height, that makes any fall that does happen less dangerous, right? There's less force, there's less impact, there's less time before they hit the ground, right? And if we think about widening it, it just gives the dogs more room to maneuver. And so in a super broad sort of way, I would say that widening the dog walk benefits larger dogs and lowering the dog walk benefits smaller dogs in a super generic sort of way.
Okay.
I guess
I mean,
I would change that. I would say that lowering it benefits all the dogs.
Right.
Because all of these dogs will basically fall at the same rate of speed when they fall off the dog walk, and they continually accelerate as they're falling. The higher they are, the harder they hit. And so it doesn't matter whether it's a Great Dane or a Papillon, falling from 4 feet is going to exert a set amount of G-force on that dog when they hit the ground. And they all benefit if we lower it. I don't see a downside to lowering it until you go low enough that it really impacts course design. And that's why we went to 3 feet, was we still wanted to be able to put a tunnel under the dog walk, and we still wanted that challenge. But, an analogy that I had, or I'll talk about, is, have you ever had your dog, you're practicing, your dog runs up the dog walk? Right? We've all had that happen. And you're like, no, dog, you're not supposed to be on that dog walk. And you try to guide them down. You'd really like them to go down to the end and offer a perfect end behavior. But what they usually do is they trot across the dog walk. They get about halfway down that plank and they jump off.
Right.
They don't jump from the top. They're not stupid. But they do jump from 2-3 feet in the air.
Right.
So I believe that if we lowered it to 3 feet, it decreases the danger of the sport and lessens the chances of an injury in the event that they fall.
And when we talk about the height, I think that 3 feet seems to also, it still looks like a dog walk. It still looks like, in fact, one of the thoughts that I was having was, for anybody who has gotten a new dog, right? You've had an experienced dog. You've been running the dog walk at 4 feet, right? For years, never bothered you. And you have a new puppy and you're training them from the beginning. And you start with a low dog walk and you start raising it. And somewhere around 3 feet, I'm like, this seems like full height. And then when you get to full height, you're like, have my dogs really been doing this all my life? This looks so high. Like when you have been low, when you start going back up, 4 feet looks ludicrously high. Right. And you're like, this doesn't even feel right. Like, it feels like a challenge. It feels exciting, and it feels like a dog walk at 3 feet.
Would your mom and non-dog friends still be impressed? And I think at 3 feet, the answer is yes.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
I think the excitement level is still there, but I do believe it reduces the stress on the dog. Right. Because just like with our young dogs, why do we make them low with our young dogs? We want to teach them they can jump on and off. We don't want them worried. We want them confident. And the way you gain that confidence is by lowering the dog walk. Now, if we raise it up, what's the purpose in raising it to 4 feet?
Right.
Other than the rules.
That's kind of what I was saying, the burden of proof. Instead of saying why should we move it to 3? Why not ask the question, what do we gain by going from 3 to 4? Right. So I feel like, it is interesting because the height is much easier to talk about than the width, because because it's easy for people to do for the most part. Like, a lot of people's dog walks can be at 3 or 4. And so it's kind of like low barrier to entry change to take a look at that.
So they don't have to modify it. They don't need to buy a new dog walk.
Right. Yeah, the majority of the dog walks out there are adjustable height in some fashion. Right. And even the ones that aren't could be made a lower height with minimal expense. You could take one that has fixed legs and you could chop the legs off, have somebody weld them back on, and you'd have 3-foot legs. That's stuff that's doable at a fraction of the cost of a new dog walk.
Right.
Right. Okay. Now I'm going to take a step back here. And I will say, Sarah, that I do understand the point that you're making. And I agree with both of you when Mark says that all dogs will benefit. I think that's right.
Right.
But relative to shoulder height, I do think small dogs would probably benefit a little bit more from a reduction in height. Imagine putting your current 24-inch dog, height class dog, on an 8-foot tall dog walk, right? Compared to what a Papillon does when a Papillon falls off the top of a 4-foot dog walk. Imagine the fall relative to the dog's shoulder, right?
Well, and one of the emails that we got was specifically somebody that had been running large dogs and then got a small dog and suddenly had a lot of anxiety about their dog on the dog walk.
Right. I don't want to belabor the point. I just want to point out that you wanted to point out that there are height differences.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
The next thing I want to do is go back to what Ann Brow's friend pointed out, and I wish we had this friend's name so we could refer to this person by name. But for this podcast, this person is going to have to be Ann Brow's friend. So Ann Brow's friend says, well, what are we testing here, right? And you got to go back to the very beginning of agility. And I wasn't there when we got all these equipment pieces, right? But I kind of think that the tunnel was built with material that was lying around and it happened to be that diameter. And they said, hey, I think we can fit a dog through here, right? And the PVC weave poles is probably some available standard size until there was standardization across organizations. And planks, they came, why isn't it 7 inches? Or why isn't it 11 inches or 15 inches? I'm guessing because planks come, at least when I went to Home Depot 20, 30 years ago, what was it 10? You used to build dog walks out of wood. They used to be monstrosities.
I built a dog walk out of wood.
I didn't build it.
Yeah.
I assisted Sarah in building it. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're made 2x12s. I mean, that's what you buy.
2x12s. Exactly. And I'm not sure were there ever 2x10s.
Yes, and the USDA, I understand that when a 2x10 was actually, or a 10-inch dog walk was legal at some point in time.
Yeah, I saw that in one of the emails too. Yeah.
So and the reason it was legal is because those were the materials available to people, and they were like, hey, well, some organizations or clubs or trial venues are having this kind of equipment, and we want to be able to accommodate that, right? So there's a lot of arbitrary built into it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's one. But if we think about it, testing height, right? At 3 feet, in my opinion, you're still testing height.
Mm-hmm.
Can I get a quick straw poll? Jen, at 3 feet, are we still testing height somewhat?
Yeah, I would say
I think so, right? Obviously not as much as 4, but if we're so gung-ho about height, why don't we raise it up to 5 or 6? Get really spectacular. Next on difficulty of execution, I'm going to kind of tie that in with how their foot falls. So imagine as Malinois and other working type dogs do in Mondio ring sport kind of competitions. You see these cool videos of Malinois climbing 20-foot walls and biting people's legs and arms and dragging them down, etc., both in competition and in movies. When they cross these beams, they're almost like the, I don't know how to describe the beams that you see gymnasts on, human gymnasts on. They are very narrow. I'm talking about 2 inches? I've seen them do it on rope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? That rope can't be more than 1 inch. Why don't we do that for agility?
Slack line.
Yeah, right?
We'll do a slack line.
Right? Imagine a dog, if you're a spectator, you know nothing about the sport and you're looking for entertainment and football season is now done and you stumble across this on ESPN and you see this Malinois jumping through the tire and doing a teeter that moves and weave pulls. It's spectacular. And then they get to this thin beam and they're running across this beam, even if they have to slow down, because I think dogs would do it slower than they would today's current dog walk. But what if we changed the dog walk to a thin beam that was 2 inches wide? Right? I think most dogs could probably be taught to do that. But should we? Do we need that? I don't think we do. What we have now has spectator appeal, right? And I would make the argument that at 18 inches, it's still going to have spectator appeal. It is not going to be noticeably different to even agility people, in my opinion, when you're looking at it on TV, And those are the two things, in my opinion, that the dog walk really tests, right? Actual foot agility of the foot, balance, etc. And what was the other thing? Height. Right. Some fear of heights. Right. Which I don't know that agility should be testing, to be totally honest. And obviously that fear of relative height is much worse for small dogs. In return for adjusting these two things, you are, in my opinion, and this is where people are going to have debates because people are going to want to see data. Some people are going to want to see data because it's not intuitive to them, that you are reducing the injury risk in two different directions. One, fall from heights, as Mark rightly pointed out, right? We do this in human medicine all the time. I think intuitively, without doing any studies, but it turns out we have actual studies that prove this is true. When old people fall down, it's bad. When old people fall down off of ladders
It's worse.
from a height greater than like 2 feet, right?
Yeah.
The injury risk is catastrophically increased, right? Of
Yes.
every bad thing, right? So I personally, I don't really need to see a study, I think, in dogs. But that's just me. But you're reducing that fall risk. You're trading that off for height. And the other for agility by widening it. It's related to the first thing, which is, again, injury risk of falls, right? Because if you don't have that foot agility, you lose it, you're going to fall, right? And so there is some risk. So I hope that makes sense as far as like those two dimensions that we are looking at.
Right.
There was somebody who put out a really good post back in the fall when this was going on, and she explained the difference between danger and risk. Danger is an inherent danger in something. In this case, the danger is falling from 4 feet in the air. We could make the dog walk wider, but the danger would still be the same of falling, okay? We can change the risk by making it wider. So you could use the analogy of football. Okay, football players have a certain danger of injury by running into each other. That's there. That's going to continue to be there. But when they strap a helmet on the football player, that lowers the risk of an injury. Do you see there's a difference between danger and risk? And so when we looked at this dog walk, my thought was we could come at it from two sides. If we just lower it, everybody benefits, even the doofus, uncoordinated dog that's going to be crazy and fall off. His chance of injury is lessened, as well as the risk of fall. Then the risk will benefit, the dog who is actually trained. It's wider. It gives him some more room for error. You talked about the difference between small dogs and larger dogs as it relates to the height, but the larger dogs are put at a big disadvantage because of the width, because their striding has to change. A study that I plan to do as soon as I can get it organized is to start testing a whole bunch of dogs on a standard dog walk, and then look at how many times their feet step to the edge of that dog walk and compare that based on size. Because the small sample of small dogs I have video of, you can see that their stride does not change like the big dogs do, because they have room. You have a little dog that jumps 12 inches. Well, they're only 4 inches wide. They got 4 inches on each side of them when they're running across the dog walk.
Right.
Versus I saw a video just today, someone's posted, and it was a Great Dane going up the up plank, and simultaneously both of his rear legs came off the dog walk, one on one side, one on the other.
Oh,
Poor guy. And he flopped down, and then he folded over and rolled off of it. I don't think he was hurt because he wasn't very high, but it really illustrated how that 12-inch plank just isn't right for that dog.
So that is a fantastic segue into something else that we wanted to talk about, which is that I think that there are two kind of major points of view that are driving this discussion. And I want to make sure that we look at them separately, because we've talked a fair amount about safety. And I think that that's one that a lot of people use. And they also safety can sometimes be used as a bit of a weapon, in that as soon as you call something a safety issue, then, like we were saying, people are unwilling to come out against it, because then you might be accused of not having your dog's best interest at heart.
Right. I don't care about my dog is what it comes across.
Exactly. Right. So there's the safety issue, but I think that there is a completely separate issue that really has very little to do with safety, which you have basically alluded to, which is, I would call, inclusivity. And I know Esteban is very, passionate about the idea of the width being something that would be great for big dogs, because we started with big dogs. We started with a Rottweiler, and it is different. And even if I'm not worried that my dog will get hurt, the large dogs are penalized for being large in the way that they have to negotiate the obstacle. Now, I understand that we can't completely get rid of that, right? They also have struggle with tunnels and they struggle with weaves and things like that. And, you know, this sport is kind of built for the mid-sized dog. But if we kind of like, I guess another way to view it is if we were constructing our first dog walk ever, might we construct it differently than how it's constructed now? And if we would like it better, and if it would be better, then could we not discuss whether that is something that could happen in reality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of this is going to depend on what actually happens when people start taking a look at the modified dog walks, because I think that's going to happen. You know, Mark, you're here telling us that you're going to continue doing some experiments. You know, Katerina is doing what she's doing, and y'all are probably not going to be the only ones. And I'll say, spoiler alert, I think some organizations should be taking a look at this as well. But what if I told you, the listener, that changing to 3 feet and 18 inches, 20% of all dogs in agility are going to be unaffected. They're basically going to run it the same. No issue, no change, no decrease really in risk because maybe they don't fall down a lot anyway, right? But what if I told you of the remaining 80% that there was going to be some kind of benefit? So there's going to be a group of dogs that are going to fall less. There's going to be another group of dogs that are going to fall just as often, but since they're dropping from a foot less, they have less injury. Right? And then this is a hidden group, and I think people aren't thinking about this. There's going to be a whole bunch of dogs who don't really love the dog walk. Their owner can't really think of a time they fell off. Maybe, you know, maybe they popped off, but they don't really go fast enough. They run the dog walk in, say, 3 to 5 seconds. Okay? And they would love to see their dog run a little bit faster. And suddenly, a chunk of these dogs are going to be much more comfortable, and they are going to have better times. Right? And they're going to have better feelings about the dog walk, which may, for a subset of those dogs, increase their general speed on course because the one obstacle that is causing them anxiety is no longer causing them anxiety. And oh, by the way, if the dog walk is 18 inches, and I can't take credit for this, Sarah pointed out to me, and the teeter stays at 12 inches, now maybe the dogs have a better visual differentiator between those two obstacles, right? I personally believe we should be doing more to differentiate visually what it looks like to get on a teeter versus a dog walk. Like, I don't know, we should add flowers or ribbons or tie a balloon to the teeter. I think we can do much more than we are doing rather than every, 1 out of 20 big competitions say, oops, I guess the dogs all thought it was the teeter that day. Or they flew off the teeter because they thought it was the dog walk. I think we can do better. To me, that is a human issue, right? The dogs are telling us something is wrong, but we're not doing anything about it. So if I tell you that this is an opportunity to fix things for a large group of dogs, we should at the very least, and so now I've made my position apparent, explore the possibilities and get some data.
Right.
If you watch the video, there's near the end of the video, we actually have a dog that you could see was stuttering on their way to the dog walk. And the story behind that is that dog's fallen off the dog walk in training. It's a young dog, just starting to trial, but not in standard yet. And really, that dog's career is in jeopardy if they can't overcome the stress for the bad experience of falling off the dog walk. We talk about injury, but how many of these dogs that have had a frightful experience falling off the dog walk, like the ones you see at the end of my video, did that make an impression on them that has stuck with them and created humongous training challenges to try to even get the dog to do it? And then me as a handler would start asking myself the question, why am I making my dog do something they don't like? And then I start questioning the entire career of this dog. Mm-hmm. If he doesn't like it, I have a border collie at home, doesn't have issues with the dog walk, but he hates the show site. And it took me a long time to figure out he's a happier camper if I just don't show him anymore. And because I couldn't overcome that stress. Well, I'm seeing it in that dog as he approaches the dog walk. When we put him on the wider one that was lower, that stress all disappeared. He says, I can handle this one. This one looks safe. And then suddenly this gentleman has his dog back because of that change. How many dogs out there are in that situation? I mean, we've all had dogs that stress about something in agility that we've tried to work through. And then sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not. But 4 feet in the air on a 12-inch plank, I've lost my passion for it at this point because I've been looking at this 18-inch wide plank that's only 3 feet high. They're sitting side by side in my training arena, and suddenly that tall one's looking narrower and more stressful than it really needs to be.
Exactly.
Here, I want to jump in there. That's such a great point. How many people out there, especially want to address people who in agility think of themselves as having the highest, most competitive aspirations. Okay. Mm-hmm. But how many of you, after having tried to campaign your dog at, say, 26 inches or medium-sized dog at 18 inches in the old jump heights, and you got to move the dog back down to 16 or 12 or whatever their natural height is. And it's just this feeling of relief, and seeing your dog zip around and be happy and drop less bars and think, well, I think this is physically better for my dog, and having that kind of relief, like, why not?
Yeah, I do that with my students a lot. That as their dogs are, they've completed most of their goals in agility. The dog's 8, 9 years old. I encourage them. I tell them I've never met anybody that's moved down to preferred that looked back at me and said, "Well, that was a stupid move. I shouldn't have done it." They all, they all like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now. Mark, before we started this podcast, you had raised a really great point, and that is that there is some value in doing studies in general, like let's take a closer look at it before we make any decisions. And I don't think any agility organization is going to suddenly jump out there and tomorrow, in the same way that we got rid of the chute, decide that the dog walk is going to be changed, not without more research. And I think that's the right thing to do. Because we don't necessarily know, although it seems so intuitive, that these changes would be beneficial to the dog. It could actually make the very issue that you're trying to solve, which is safety injury, right? It could possibly, in theory, make it worse. What are some things you've heard from competitors about that?
The only negative thing we've heard is that some people are afraid of the speed that this is going to create, that the dog is going to go faster. And my response to that is why? Why would a dog go faster on a lower, wider dog walk? I mean, Jen, one of you guys, give me an answer. What would that be? Why would they go faster?
Go ahead, Jen.
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is because they're more comfortable with it, which is
more comfortable, right?
To the point of this. Yes.
Right.
Yes, they're more comfortable. There's less stress on them.
I think,
is any of that a bad thing?
Right. I think, though, that the kinds of dogs that are going to go faster, like Jen said, are dogs that are going to be more comfortable with it. I think the dogs that are going maximally fast now, right? I don't know that they can get that much faster. They're basically at their physical limit.
Yes. And here we do know the answer, right?
Right.
You're constrained by physics. All you do is compare their top speed to when they are running around on the floor without anything.
Right.
It's very easy to do. There's not some infinity number that dogs are going to reach and start killing themselves.
Right, exactly. So that was basically my point, is that the dogs that are going to go faster are dogs that are artificially slowing themselves down, and it's okay for them to go faster.
Yes.
And the dogs that are already going at a, quote, breakneck speed, to use a really bad, phrase, are they can't go any faster. They're already at the maximum speed.
Right. But I think it's still worth doing. And
I do. I think that the thing, though, besides speed, is that if they have more room to, I guess I don't know of a better way to say it other than bank their turn, right? If they have room to complete part of their turn on the plank, that they might do that, as opposed to the dogs, because there's literally no room on the plank. They have to, square up before they get on. But if there's more room for them to use, they might use the more room. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I have on the speed issue is that if we took an extreme case, let's say there was a dog that did a 2-on, 2-off. They were worried about the dog walk. They were relatively slow. We put them on the new dog walk and they got 3 times faster, to take an extreme. And while running that 3 times faster, he fell off. I don't think speed is going to correlate to injury. The dog moving horizontally when they fall off, it just means they're going to slide more when they're on the ground. You think about an analogy would be if you ever watched motorcycle racing, okay? And these guys are crazy. They're on these road race motorcycles going 150 mile an hour. You know, they'll fall off at 150 mile an hour. Now they're suited up, but they slide along until they come to a stop, and then they often just get up and brush themselves off, looking to see that nobody's coming behind them. The speed isn't what hurts a dog, it's the impact. And the impact happens greater at the higher height. But the speed, that'd be like saying we shouldn't move our dogs down to preferred because they're going to run faster and they might hurt themselves.
Right.
Which is an argument that people have made previously.
Right. I think I don't disagree with your conclusion that that the speed is not, that I don't think that them going faster is going to be worse in terms of a reason not to do it. But I think I disagree a little bit that the fall is not as bad, because I think to go to the extremes, when you have the dogs that just kind of trot over, and then let's say they choose to jump off, and they land like on all 4 feet, almost like a bunny rabbit, if that makes sense, versus if they're in the middle of a trotting run, then as they fall off, you know, their feet are flailing and they land more weird. So like, I do think that there is a difference between falling off going faster versus slower. But like I said before, I think the dogs that are going maximally fast are going maximally fast, and the other dogs, like we want agility is a speed sport. We want them to go as fast.
To answer your point, Sarah, I would just split them into 2 groups. So you would be studying 4 groups. So you have 2 groups that are going the same speed but falling off at different heights, right? And then you have 2 groups that have the same height but they're falling off at different speeds, and then you just compare the injury rates.
But I think we could kind of segue again into like what kind of data do we need to make these determinations, because I think that this is also a thing that is to simply use the data of falls and injuries as the only reason to change a dog walk, I think is very difficult, because I think that, every fall is unique in terms of like how dogs land, and there's freak injuries, and they land funny and weird, and it might have very little to do with the height of the dog walk at all, but just like where they were and which foot hit first and all of this stuff. I think it's like I guess I'm just not sure that I feel like falling back on we need data to make this. I think data is good. I think we should continue to get data, but I also don't necessarily think that you have to completely justify a change to the equipment based purely on injury risk, especially when we are talking about something that, we've already established that there are concerns besides safety that might warrant a change. It's not just about safety. It's also about, are we penalizing larger dogs? Are there dogs not competing in the sport that could be competing in the sport? Honestly, if 62% of competitors, right, which is a majority, would like to see a change, could the reason not simply be the competitors themselves would enjoy the sport more if this change was made? Like, right. That could be the one and only reason that you make a change, is that people asked for it, right? Mm-hmm. So right. I do think
you're
we
saying
should get
that
data.
Safety doesn't necessarily need to drive the conversation, although currently it is for a lot of people.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I
think that's super interesting
in there, because that's kind of a little bit of where I stand on things. I will say that I haven't been as active on the social media part and reading a ton of comments, because I haven't commented, so it hasn't popped up. But I don't know that I think there's a single person out there that is not in favor of safety. And even the people who want, I don't know how to word this right, who want the data. There's a lot of people say, we want the data. We want to see the facts. We want to see the numbers. It's not necessarily that they're trying to prove that the dog walk is unsafe as is. I think it's all the other stuff. And by all the other stuff, like two things that come to mind super quick for me are the financial strain to replace and change an obstacle. Now, my personal viewing on that is that should never be a reason not to put your dog's safety ever. So if somebody said to me, you had to drop $3,000 tomorrow to replace your dog walk, I'll do it. But the other one is this idea of getting every organization and every agility program on the same protocol. If tomorrow we woke up and every single person in the agility world said, we are going to a wider dog walk, I'm not sure anybody would mind. Nobody's sitting there going, no, I want it higher. I want it more dangerous. I want it more narrow. A big part of the concern that I'm seeing and a big part of this drive for facts and data and research is because of the potential conflict that you're going to have one organization or one part of the world or one country go to one type of dog walk and another organization not. And now there becomes this huge conflict. I think the other thing is, I've heard people discussing the idea, well, okay, if we take the dog walk away, because that's another thing, we haven't even gotten into that. The people that are just saying remove it all together, right? We removed the chute. We never did data on the chute. We just deemed the chute dangerous and we got rid of it. Nobody did data or videos.
Absolutely.
We used common sense, right? We got rid of it. And then we go, okay, let's get rid of the dog walk. And then next thing we know, let's lower the A-frame. And next thing we know, it's get rid of the teeter. And next thing we know, the A-frame's gone. And now we're doing barrels and hoops, which maybe that's the way we go. But I think to my point is there's so many factors that I think that are surrounding this. And I'm not sure that safety is like the main one, because I think everybody wants safety. It's the ramifications of the change that makes sense. Does that am I wording that right? It's the
totally makes sense. Yes.
People, not the increased safety that's scaring people. And that's where I'm at. I'm like, I don't mind if it goes lower or wider, frankly. I'm on a selfish level. I don't really mind. For me, it's not the financial. What it's going to be is if one organization decides to widen and or lower and another doesn't, you're going to see people pick and choose. I think they should. I do not see a scenario in which I'm going to ask a single dog to do both a 18-inch and a 12-inch. There's not. I might have one dog that does 12-inch and one dog that has 18. I just don't see a scenario in which I ask them to do both. And that's what people are scared of. The having to pick, the having to choose, the having to have the risk that in my country, we do an 18-inch one, but I want to go and compete in a different country and it's only 12 inches. And I think that's what's scaring a lot of people. Like I said, for me, if that's the route it goes, then I pick and choose, right? It's no different than other pieces of equipment that I don't train other organizations. But I think that's what's scaring people. I don't think there's anybody that's questioning the safety part. It's how do we do it in a way that the transition is safe, not necessarily the piece of equipment itself. Right.
To add to that just a little bit, we've been looking at this because I'm like the only guy around with an 18-inch dog walk. So we can play around with things. I would question a little bit, and maybe Jen, you'd see this if you ran your dogs across this. If we woke up this morning and AKC had decided that they're going to go to this new dog walk, but yet we'll pick another organization. USDAA said they're not, just randomly picking here. You could still, I believe you can train your dog on the narrow dog walk and then walk into the show on the wide one, having hardly ever seen it at all. And your performance, from what I can see in my 18 dogs we ran across it, the performance only got better. That is narrower dog walk.
That is actually something that I had been thinking of exactly, was that, it's not necessarily a true statement that every individual competitor who owns a dog walk would have to go to 18. It's like, to me, it would be a version of overtraining, right?
In fact,
you train to the harder, right?
Little dogs may not have a big reason to go to the wide one at home. Long as you
home,
get the
right.
height the same at home, it's not, because it's not as, I believe as I do more studies, my estimate is that you're going to see a much lower rate of dogs getting close to the edge on little dogs. So if you're running that Papillon or that small Sheltie, I don't think you're going to see that issue, and you could run on your 12-inch dog walk. I mean, how many people out there today are still practicing in their backyard with an 8-foot dog walk? Because they used to be legal, and they're still out there, and some people don't have room.
Oh, yeah.
And they train on an
remember.
8-foot dog walk.
Right.
Well, that's a lot bigger difference going between 8 and 12-foot lengths than this width issue would be. And people, and when you really start looking, watch videos of people and stuff, I always remember watching some of the years ago, watching some European handlers that I followed, and they're practicing at home. And the equipment they were practicing on was nothing like competition equipment. They were practicing on the raggedy old rickety things, and then they were going out and winning world championships, you know. So I think that sometimes we overvalue that you have to have exactly the right thing. And in this case, I believe you could practice on 12 inches with most dogs. Now, if I had a Malamute, I'd probably be shortlisted to want to get a wide one.
Right, right, exactly.
Right away. But if I was running, I have a little 7-month-old Walker here, my first small dog, she'd probably be fine, you know, when I start training.
I think that's an interesting point to make when we look at the financial cost, because I think that if everybody had to buy a new dog walk, I think that hurts the individuals the most, right? Obviously, because it just comes out of their money, you know, that they have to live, you know, and that's like, you know, a couple of mortgage payments or something like that. And so if the individual can continue working on their 12 and it's just the equipment that we use at the trial or maybe at training facilities that has to change, I think it's a lot more reasonable for those organizations to make that change, because I was thinking about it and I'm like, okay, so if it's like, let's just call it a $3,000 dog walk. Let's say you have you have 500 runs per day, and you charge $1 more per run at your that on your trial that you're hosting, and in 6 trial days you've paid for your new dog walk. So like if you if you have classes and you have 100 students that are going to that work and that are that come to your facility, and you do like $5 more per student, then after a couple of cycles of classes, you've paid for it. So I think that the cost to clubs and to trial, secretaries that have their own sets of equipment and stuff like that, I think it's absolutely manageable. And it's the individual where it becomes more difficult. But as we've just said, I had the exact same thought. I think that I wouldn't necessarily feel like I had to immediately get an 18-inch just because the organization was using an 18-inch.
Yeah. Now, what I would add to that, though, is you certainly can't go the other way. In other words, you can't go in your backyard and practice on your brand new 18-inch dog walk and then show up at a venue where it's a 12-inch dog walk. You can only go in the one direction. It's kind of like the 26 versus 24-inch tunnels. There's a training center near me that has all 26-inch tunnels, and there's a few regulars there with big dogs, and that's the only place they trial. And one of the reasons why is if that Malamute hits a 24-inch tunnel after he's been training and doing all of his work has always been in the giant one, he's in for a rude awakening when he hits that 24-inch tunnel. And it would be the same way with this. You can go up, but you can't go back. Would be the way I'd look at it. The other thing to think about when we talk about transition is how many dog walks really need to be available in the beginning, because it was mentioned all of these dog walks, that UKI put out and talked about this huge budget. So I started looking at that. And here in Michigan, I don't know what it's like down in Texas. I think it's similar to this where you're at, Jen. There is a relatively small number of training centers and clubs that actually host events in their building. In Michigan, it's 6. You can show in multiple venues nearly every weekend. You can take your pick. Do you want to do AKC? That's every weekend. There's a UKI here, a USDAA, CPE. There's multiple ones every weekend, but they're spread around 6 buildings. So we're really to make the transition, initially, you're only talking about 6 dog walks, not 50, not millions of dollars. And then the other thing to keep in mind is there's lots of manufacturers out there, and I'm just one of them, but I'm looking at building adapters that fit on my dog walk. So instead of buying a $3,000 dog walk, you're buying these adapters that screw on, and now your dog walk is 18 inches wide. And I'm not the only guy who will do that. Anybody else could do it as well. I mean, you could insert manufacturer's name in, and he could do the same thing. So
Yeah,
we're not really talking about always replacing these equipment and throwing the old one in the dumpster and all of that. That old 12-inch dog walk, if you did replace it, there's somebody in class with a Papillon who would give their eye teeth to have it to practice at home. You know, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember I saw, I think Roger Lee had posted like a financial analysis where he's like, okay, it's just not a real analysis, just like he had a hypothetical, right? 50 states, 50 dog walks. Each state, I believe, was the number he used, $7.5 million. And I appreciate what he's trying to say there. But no, it's not how it works, right? Eventually, every single dog walk that's out there currently, think about this, every single one that exists everywhere is going to have to be replaced, right?
Or updated.
It's going to have to be updated. It's going to have to be changed. So, you know, I'm not really buying that as an argument.
I think I want to clarify, because I know the point that you're making, but I don't think you actually made it, right? When you say that everyone has to be replaced, you don't mean to meet this change. You mean if we do nothing, dog walks don't last forever.
Exactly.
You have to maintenance, you have to, you know, replace them, resurface them, stuff like that. So it's eventually every dog walk that's out there, even if we made no change, would be replaced.
Right. And I think Jen pointed out very wisely that we have always had these different issues, from jump heights to chutes to even what kind of dog walks are used. And I remember back in the day with Gitchy, running contacts internationally, I believe that they could go up to 4.5 feet height, right? So I dimly recall that there are variations in height that you might see at FCI World Championship, right? So without assurances as to what that height would be, like, I think we had to get up and adjust her height even up and make sure she could still hit running contacts there, because you didn't want to show up at the trial and her not be used to it and then miss all her contacts, right? So the other thing is the chute. So the AKC had a shorter chute than the long chute in USDA. That was a big deal for small and medium-sized dogs. So you would train to the higher standard. So in your class, if you had a highly competitive school or program or aspirations, you would probably have a USDAA chute, right? The aperture, I think. Yeah, there were differences in the aperture for the tire, right? We've always had these differences between organizations, right? Jump height, I think, is one that a lot of people can wrap their head around, because that's affected many different breeds and many different jump heights over the years, looking to compete across multiple organizations. So yes, it would be messy, but no, I don't think a transition period, a messy transition period should be a deterrent into, at the very least, exploring the topic. Okay, so now I think we're ready to talk about how do we explore this, right? And UKI, so interesting, made a post, and then the next day had another post. So essentially it was like, hey, there's a lot of things to think about. And then that's my one-line summary of the first post. And then the second post was, we are asking our judges to track how many dogs fall off. And it turns out not just UKI now, but CPE has asked their judges to do the same. Those are the two I know of as of this recording. Have either of you heard about other organizations, USDA?
I thought NADAC also posted.
NADAC is also.
Yeah, I thought I saw a post from them asking the same.
Okay, so now we have 3 organizations who are at least nominally looking into it. Now, is that the right data to collect? That is a whole nother different scenario. I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, you all have just forgotten. Probably every single dog who has ever done agility has fallen off a dog walk at least once. I'm going to put that out there. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm going to say 90% plus have fallen off, at least, maybe not in a trial, but if you include trials, practices, trainings, probably they fell off and it was no big deal, or they fell off and they were very low and close to the ground and you just didn't remember, you know. Probably there are people who think their dogs have never fallen off, and their dog's probably fallen off 30 times over a 10-year career, right? There's a lot of memory bias. There are issues here. So yes, by having judges report, you're going to get a capture of how many dogs are falling off in trial situations on your courses, right? But you are not capturing where the majority of dog walks happen. And where is that?
At home and practice.
At home and in practice, right?
I did a little bit of thinking on that as well, because
let's hear it.
Obviously I've seen Greg's post about adding this, and I applaud it. I think there is no such
and
thing.
Greg runs he runs the UKI. So for people who don't know.
And so I think it's a fabulous idea to do this, but I just started picking numbers, and I decided, let's say that when he comes back in May, we find out that 1/2 of 1% of the dogs fell off. That would be 1 out of every 200 passes, because I don't think you're going to see a lot.
Yeah, I was about to say that sounds like more than I will expect. Yep.
Okay.
It's going to be a small number.
if it was that small number, and then I started thinking, a few weeks ago you had Carrie DeYoung on, and she said that the average AKC exhibitor ran 2 dogs and trialed twice a month. So I started doing the math where I'm thinking, how many dog walks does that person do with their 2 dogs, and then guessed how many times they'll do one in practice. Statistically speaking, her dogs will both fall off the dog walk next year.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough. I mean, so it doesn't need to be a very big number to have, to actually have accidents happen.
Right. Just getting the data, that's the first step, right? And when you come back and you say, hey guys, less than 1% of dogs fell off during the trial. Okay, but what is the implication of that? How do we interpret that data, right? What kind of benefit are we going to see here? And so I think that's very
And the thing that's impossible for us to compare to is, how will that compare to a wide one? We do not have the capability today to do that. Because for starters, Jen, are you willing to set one of your A dogs aside and say, well, I'm only going to run it on a wide dog walk for testing purposes, and we're going to train it to a wide dog walk? And that, even though there's no organization where you can show them, you'd basically be ending the dog's competitive career.
Right.
Do it enough. Yeah. Do it enough so that the dog is really acclimated to it. That's not doable. We need to find 100 people willing to do that, and then have them record every attempt and do it for a year. It's not practical. So
exactly.
So it's like the shoot. I mean, how many injuries really happened? And when AKC shortened the shoot from the long one to 6 feet, what happened to the injury? We don't know. Nobody's ever done this before. So what we really need to do is decide if the problem is large enough that it deserves some action, consider the different options we have, and then decide whether or not it's worth it to take that action. And decide, and the big question you've already brought up is, are you willing to make that change if the rest of the globe is not?
Yeah, absolutely. This conversation has been happening.
I've had conversations with FCI reps over online there, and it's a topic that they are aware of, and but will they change? I don't know. I mean, I don't have any of that information, but they're aware of it, and there's people, putting together information. I'm sure they've seen this video.
So I'm all for data, and I love data, and I think we should get the data, and we should 100% look at the data and analyze it as much as we can. However, I caution against saying that no change can be made unless the data supports it. And the reason, like you said, is we can theorize, but we can't know the effects, right? Running a dog who has a history on 12 on an 18 and teaching a dog from the beginning on 18, those are 2 different things. We can't necessarily emulate it. But my other counter would be, I guarantee you that there were not scientific studies done on every piece of equipment that we have today, right?
Absolutely.
They were just invented. They were just made up. And it is okay for us to decide as a community, or for enough people to decide, or for it to be popular enough that we just make a change. It doesn't necessarily have to be data driven.
Right. So I'm not sure where organizations plan on going since they made these decisions so quickly. Yeah. With how they're trying to get this data and what they expect this data to show. right? Because as you said, what are you going to do with the data? Now, obviously, it's obvious to me that, if it's like 2-3%, that's a huge number. Someone else listening might say 2-3%, that sounds like, no, we don't need to change anything. Only 2 out of 100 runs, a dog falls. That's crazy. Why would we change anything? So it's understanding again and interpreting that data is one. And then I think that something else that people aren't considering is maybe doing some kind of pilot program. AKC was really good at this kind of stuff. Oh, we're going to introduce Premier. We're going to introduce international courses. We're not going to make it part of your mock title requirements, right? Mm-hmm. And to date, I believe it's still not, right? You don't have to do any titling in ISC or mm-hmm. whatever, right? In fact, they created a new title, right? That for fast and time to beat, things like that, but they didn't touch the mock, right?
Right.
Okay, so you kind of compartmentalize it and you roll it out in a wise way. Let's conduct a pilot study. Let's get a couple of clubs. Let's have a trial and then record all of those runs and then get some data experts out there, or at least some casual enthusiasts to look at it. And then most of all, and I think this is the big opportunity here for organizations. So if you run an organization and you're listening to this podcast, as you should be, listen, there's an opportunity here, because if it turns out that a 3-foot tall, 18-inch wide dog walk is going to be a lot better for it doesn't even have to be a majority of dogs, but a large group of dogs. And suddenly dogs who weren't trialing are trialing, dogs who are trialing more, dogs who are trial better and run faster, and their owners are happier. It is a great differentiator for your organization, right? Imagine the opportunity for a UKI who is horning in on AKC's share of agility runs in this country, right? Maybe USDAA stages a comeback because they're the organization that has this new dog walk that everybody's dogs are doing great on, right? So I think there are ways that organizations can both get some data, do a little bit of research, and roll out some pilot programs, not just to gauge safety, however they end up defining it with whatever experts they're able to produce, but do people like it? And people are going to like it when they notice their dog's liking it, when the dog's performances is better, when they have more confidence, right? The dogs have more confidence. They run with more confidence, right? And so, at the end of the day, the sport is very much about the relationship between dog, handler, and challenge. And we are just tweaking things here, but any tweak in the formula that it may initially look like, oh, you're decreasing the challenge a little bit, but gives you a huge increase in satisfaction of the other two components, right? The dog and the handler. I mean, I think that's going to be a big win for an organization, and it's going to be an opportunity, right? Rather than a headache.
I'm going to go back to the very beginning of this podcast when we talked about how I'm a manufacturer. And I just want to make this really clear for people that this is not in any way a way of generating more business for a manufacturer. That the truth of this is it's most likely damaging my business right now. Who would you buy a new dog walk this week?
Nope. I would wait until the dust settles. You'd
wait till the dust settles. I'm getting phone calls for dog walks that are on order with people with that concern. Also, I have a 4-month, a 16-week wait for contact obstacles right now. I don't need to be making more contact obstacles. And so I want to make it really clear that I am an exhibitor first. What created Clip and Go Agility was I was trying to make a widget that I could make enough money to cover the cost of my entries. That's how it started. And so in no way, shape, or form is this a business thing that's trying to do this. It's my passion. It's what I do. It's what I've done in the past, is try to make our sport safer. Our sport is relatively young as sports go. And so evolution of the sport is only to be expected. Look back at a videotape from the 50s of what football looked like and look at it today. These sports evolve. Ours, what has it been, 30 years now? Is that right? I've been in it about 20, but 30 years, and you look back at those old videos and you look at what we do today, and it has changed a lot. And so this is just, I've never come up against the rules before. I've always tried to improve the sport within the framework of the rules. This is a first. But I felt strongly enough that this was a benefit for that. And then the only other thing I wanted to do, because I know a lot of people are listening to this, I just want to say you're welcome to the thousands of people who have replied to those things with thank yous to me for producing the video. I appreciate it. Obviously, I can't reply back to all of them, but the overall reply, you had talked about your statistics there of how it went, but if you were to look at the comment sections under the posts, you'd see that the vast majority of these people are like, thank you for doing this. This is a good step in the right direction. We appreciate it. And so for anybody that's done that on that post, I really do want to thank you for taking that effort to do that and say you're welcome. And I don't know what's next. I know I'm working with some researchers that are going to be real researchers, not just Mythbusters like me, and see what we can come up with for some strategies to collect some better data. And I'm sure that'll all be coming out soon enough. But I'm looking forward to what that brings.
So as we wrap up this podcast, a couple of points that I want to make. One is that this is kind of rapidly evolving. I think your post went out on Monday.
Yep, Monday afternoon.
Yeah. And, again, we've been talking about these things, but seeing it in reality was different. And then there was so much response. It wasn't just your video. Like, yes, your video kind of sparked it, but there was so much response to your video. Like everybody was commenting or making their own post or sharing your post, or the organizations were stepping forward and making their post. And then there was responses to the organization's post. I mean, there was a lot happening. And we kind of jumped right into the middle of this to put these thoughts together and to make sure that people could listen to this podcast and really get a sense of all the different issues that come into play here, and not just kind of one side of it or anything like that. So, as things change, we can absolutely come back and revisit this podcast or talk about, changes going forward. If people wanted to get a hold of you directly, or if they had questions for you or ideas or anything like that, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you, Mark?
Well, the easiest way, if they're on social media, would be our Facebook page, which is Clip and Go Agility. Just the whole thing spelled out, one big word. And then if you just do a search online, Clip and Go Agility, you will find our website right at the top, which you could contact us through that. And either myself or one of our staff members would be happy to do this. I have some helpers back there that are monitoring all this really close as well. So trying to do what we can, and I've been getting messaged by a lot, private messaged and all that by a lot of people. And right now you got to kind of sit tight. I don't have a lot of new information. I kind of spilled my guts in the video, but coming up, we're working on some things. I got meetings next week, and hopefully we'll have some more news for you guys in the near future.
All right, and that is it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsor, hititboard.com. Happy training.
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.